This is the morning, everyone. This is the May 25th meeting of the Dunn County Planning and Resource and Development Committee. Let's see. Call the meeting to order. Call the roll. Can't see the whole the entire screen. Is everyone present on the screen? We have 4 members present in the room here. Supervisor Bjork online.
I see him.
Yes, I do not see Supervisor Anderson.
Okay, so we have a quorum. And we'll call the meeting to order. Approval of the minutes from May 11th. Is there a second?
I'll second it, Supervisor Bjork.
Thank you. Any discussion or corrections? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
All opposed, no? Motion carries. Public comments. I believe we have at least one public comment. Mr. Carlson, can you read that?
Sure. So this public comment came in by email not too long ago, came in this morning at 7:54 a.m. from Harry Warden, Janice Randon. Dear Dunn County Planning and Development Committee, the town board of the town of Rock Creek, an unzoned town in Dunn County, has serious reservations about the restrictions for subdivision referenced in section 16.075 of the proposed revision of Dunn County subdivision code. The board feels the 1:8 ratio is too restrictive and should be revised to allow a wider range of options. We understand that the code has been returned to the committee for reconsideration and hope that you consider our reservations. Thank you very much. Harry Warden, Chair, Town of Rock Creek.
Great. Thank you for those comments. Much appreciated. Are there anyone here who would like to public comment? Name and address.
Tony Christopherson, E9920 630th Avenue, Elk Mound, Wisconsin. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Last night, the remainder of the unzoned towns were able to meet. We shared our feelings amongst each other, very similar to what Chairman Harry Warden had indicated in his email. And we felt that it was as a courtesy, we'd bring back, realizing that this is not on the agenda probably till your next meeting, but to express our feelings to you guys, that you know where we sit as you set your agenda for the next meeting. We'd looked at your agenda and packets from the January 26th and the February 9th meetings of the PR&D committee. And as I had shared with everyone here in the room, we had agreed that the best option for the unzoned towns would be to look at January 26, 2021, option C, no density management in the land division ordinance. Like I said, thank you for your time.
Thank you. Any other public comment? So we'll move into our agenda then. We have no public hearing today. Staff reports. We do have some folks here to talk about item 6D. So without objection, we could move that up in the first position, substitute for item A. We could help them get on with their day and ours also. So,
And Mr. Chair, could I interrupt? We also have a surveyor here for agenda item 8A. So if you would consider that after 6B.
for which item?
Item 8A.
Oh, okay. So we'll move those two up then in that order.
Thank you.
That's okay. Olson.
Yeah, so So last time, there was the public hearing and Mr. Weitzman presented everything, and I have the packet in there if we need to review some of this materials. But the committee postponed action on Mr. Weitzman's rezone request, and this was a request to rezone from GA to R1. And what was missing was we didn't have the opinion of the town of Tainter at the time, and so Mr. Weitzman did go back to the town of Tainter and was before them, and I probably need to maybe see my staff report, Tom, so I can see the date. Or keep going. Here we go. Is this the staff report for the first one? Let me just ask Mr. Weitzman, what was the date that you were before the town board? The 13th. And the town did not express any concerns over the rezone, so they're supportive of the rezone. So unless there are questions that need to be resolved, additional questions from the last meeting, I wasn't really prepared to go through the entire packet again, but it's up to the committee. So if there are no questions, I think you could down to the deliberation piece, and you can act on Mr. Weitzman's rezone request. So this is because we did open and close the public hearing. All that was left was for the committee to deliberate and take action on it.
So are we, we're not in the public hearing now.
No, we are not in the public hearing.
So we're in the discussion phase. Are there any questions? Okay. Then let's move down to item 8.
Item 9.
Item 9.
Item 9. And consider adoption of the, is there a motion to approve?
Supervisor Bjork makes that motion to approve the rezone for Mr. Bregnan.
Is there a second? Morehouse seconds. Any further discussion on it? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, say no. Carries.
So this will be on the next county board agenda, Mr. Weitzman, and I can speak with you as if you want to leave, or we can talk afterwards. But you don't need to attend the county board meeting, but you're more than welcome to.
Oh, come on.
You guys get this. So thank you very much.
Sure. Then we'll go to item 8A. Thanks for helping me. I need it today. So we have, is there someone from the audience that wanted to?
Maybe Tom, I can go through a
Okay,
staff
Tom,
report
yeah,
at
yeah.
first, and then we can have the surveyor working on the project speak to it. Morning, everyone. What you have before you, and let me get on the right page. So we received a certified survey map submitted to our office here on April 28th for review. It's mostly in the town of Red Cedar, but a small piece of it is also located within the city of Menominee. So the owners are Jamie Pond. There's a Richard and Colleen Hoyt. Property is located in section 18, town of Red Cedar, and a part of section 13, the city of Menominee. It's the certified survey map is about 31.34 acres. There's mixed zoning on the property. A portion of it is R2 and a portion of it's general ag. And the landowners are requesting to divide the property into 4 new lots. And this is in your packet. You all should have received a copy. So there's lots 1 and 2 up here, which are part of the 4th addition to Eagle Point, which is a recorded subdivision plat. And then lots 3 and 4, vacant land, unimproved land located in the town of Red Cedar. And then we also have a dedicated street, street dedication coming in that is about 95% in the town of Red Cedar, and a small portion of it is located in the city. So this dividing line here, the west line of lot 3 and lot 4 is the range line. In other words, the separator between township and city. Okay? All of the cul-de-sac is located in the city. So it's kind of a unique map from that perspective. It's in 2 different taxing municipalities. It has a lot going on. It's also part of a recorded subdivision plan. So background, Jamie Pond and Richard and Colleen Hoyt, 31 acres of land. I described where it is. They want to create 4 new building sites. Lots 1 and 2 are entirely within the R2 zoning district. Okay? Because we don't allow blended or mixed zoning on newly created parcels. So we are not creating an issue here by approving the certified survey. Lot 1 and lot 2 are currently under R2 zoning and will remain under R2 zoning. Lots 3 and 4 are within the general ag zoning district and will remain entirely within that zoning district. Creation of these 4 lots, of course, requires the preparation of a certified survey map that meets all the requirements of Chapter 16 of our land division ordinance. Typically, certified survey maps are reviewed by my office. We go through them, running through a checklist. The zoning administrator also reviews those. Once we're satisfied that it meets all applicable county ordinances and state statutes, then we go ahead and approve the map and it gets recorded at the Register of Deeds office. This CSM though is different with respect or in the regard that it's crossing the exterior boundary of a recorded subdivision plat. So if I move down here, so this is a portion of our county GIS website. You can see this purple shading on here that represents the 4th edition of Eagle Point. So state law is very clear. Anytime your certified survey map crosses the exterior boundary of a recorded plat, it needs to be approved in the same manner as the plat was. So if a plat was coming in here, this committee would be approving that plat. So hence, if a certified survey map is changing the exterior boundary of a plat, this committee also needs to approve that certified survey map. So it's more or less a technical requirement, okay? And another requirement is the exterior boundary of this newly proposed certified survey map has to be monumented in the same fashion as the plat would have, meaning larger monuments at the exterior boundaries of the plat or all changes in the sidelines of the right of way of the street. So those are the two reasons this certified survey map is before you this morning. So staff have reviewed the map like we always do, and there were some revisions that were made, some typos and some administrative things. We worked all that out with the surveyor, and the version that you see in front of you right now, I feel meets all of the requirements of our county land division ordinance, chapter 87 of Wisconsin Administrative Code, and of course, all applicable sections of chapter 236 of state statute. So our zoning administrator has also reviewed it, and he's determined that it meets all the requirements of chapter 13 of the county comprehensive zoning ordinance. So at this point, we're recommending approval of the certified survey map. And again, typically Bob and I would just sign this map off and it would be done. Sign our approval on there. But in this case, again, it requires the approval of this committee. So if there are any questions for me, I can certainly answer them. And Mr. Ron Jasperson is here. He's the surveyor that prepared this map and was hired by the applicant to do the work. So if you have any questions for him, or if maybe he has anything to add that I didn't cover, turn it back over to you, Mr. Chair.
Okay. Do you have any comments?
My name is Ron Jasperson, land surveyor that prepared this survey, worked for Off Consulting here in Menominee. Kind of give you a little history why it's presented this way. It all started out, Jamie wanted to subdivide her 2 parcels that were in the city of Menominee. Jamie has an existing driveway that goes to she has an existing house there along the river. She has an existing driveway that goes to that parcel, to that house, but the city would not allow an access easement to a city parcel. So that's why where this road dedication came around and why we subdivided the parcels in the town of Red Cedar. Been through the town of Red Cedar Plan Commission meeting last week. They recommended for approval. Had a special meeting last night at the town of Red Cedar, and the town of Red Cedar approved the certified survey map.
Thank you. Any questions, sir?
Just one of curiosity, the 3 lots on the right side in the subdivision, I understand that right? They're actually changed to 2 lots now?
Correct. At the time that that's fourth edition was created, there was, at that time, at minimum lot size was under an acre. But since then, this whole area has been rezoned, and minimum acreage now is 1 acre. And by carving this right away out of it, those 3 lots were all going to fall under 1 acre. So we combined the 3 lots into 2 to make 2 minimum 1 acre lots.
Any other questions? Make a motion to approve.
I move that we approve it, Supervisor Kinnear.
Is there a second? We're on seconds. Any further discussion? All in favor, say aye.
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 Opposed, no? Motion carries. Okay.
No, I don't want that.
Sounds like a lot of steps.
It's been a process.
Have you done this before? I thought that was not so bad.
Thank you.
Check your chat.
Janelle, can you hear me now?
I can hear you, Diane. Tom, Quinn, if you could move your mic just a little bit closer, we can hear you. It's just kind of quiet.
Okay. Any better?
That's better. Thank you.
Sorry about that. Okay. Let's see, where are we at? We're back up to staff reports. Review of groundwater ad hoc committee recommendations. Any staff want to chime in here?
Sure. Good morning, everybody. Yeah, I'll just give a little bit of update. There has been some movement, while slow on the recommendations here. I welcome your discussion on any of the particular items, but we continue to receive nutrient management plans, which is related to groundwater in many ways. Right now, our staff are following up with landowners that are supposed to have a nutrient management plan submitted and have yet to return one in. So there has been some follow-up there. Also, working with our water resource specialist, Heather Wood, on continuing the conversation and dialogue with some of these items on here, specifically related to the public-facing website for private wells and well monitoring and education that's associated with that. So that's it's been a process, especially trying to juggle some of the other issues that we have right now. Also, particular to the item there that talks about citation authority, we had a little bit of a brief conversation on that at the last meeting regarding the animal waste, the agriculture performance standards, manure management, and storage ordinance. Citation authority is incorporated as part of that, so that will be should see that coming before county board very soon. Also, further down where it talks about comprehensive land use plan, noticed in some of the documentation that Mr. Colson has provided recently, specifically, I believe it's goal number 2 incorporates groundwater within that. So continue to participate with that as needed. Make sure that that's incorporated. With that, some of the other items obviously will need at some point need further discussion by all of you as to how we would like to proceed with them, given certain staff capacity and especially the future of our staff capacity. guess with that, I can speak on more detail if you'd like, or if you have questions.
Yes.
Chase, could you talk a little bit about nutrient management? The goal here has always been 100%. Let's get everybody involved, and we don't seem to be making a lot of progress. Is that why? I guess.
Well, I think there's a number of things there. You'll be surprised, but maybe not surprised. In our communications with landowners in the community, and this is consistent with my past history as well, as landowners just aren't aware that they even need to have one, specifically crop farmers. A lot of the discussion is, well, I don't have manure, therefore I don't need to have a nutrient management plan. And that's part of our role, is to provide that education that a nutrient management plan is required. The other situation regarding nutrient management planning is it is a performance standard in NR 151, the Ag Performance Standards and Prohibitions. And part of that is the offer of cost share must be made to do that. And we do have cost share funds, and I'm hoping to increase our use of those as we move forward. But there is a hesitation within the community to adopt that type of planning. The other is some hesitation and maybe discrepancy to some degree as to the calculations for nutrient management planning. The Conservation Practice Standard 590. So if you hear a 590 plan, that is a nutrient management plan that must follow a certain conservation practice standard that's established by the federal government through the NRCS, Natural Resource Conservation Service, but it trickles down through the state, and the state gets to put in their, spin on the standard itself. So by that, I mean, they apply UW recommendations, University of Wisconsin recommendations, and there is a hesitation by some in the community, agricultural community, that those recommendations don't necessarily represent some of their practices. So when you think of more specialty crops, I think of my experience with potatoes, some of the other larger cash cropping, kidney beans, horseradish. Some of that isn't necessarily, felt that the UW recommendations are well represented, and that's part of a conversation that we need to have with those land operators and those landowners. Typically those types of operations can control a lot of land or have impact on a lot of land. So I guess I would point to some of those as some of the hesitation and the lack of progress. I would say that the other is, if you look at other counties across the state where they have more participation in nutrient management planning, they also typically have not only countywide zoning, but they have a large participation in farmland preservation, where the recipients are receiving a tax credit, and part of that they're required to have a nutrient management plan. While we in Dunn County have growing participation in farmland preservation, particularly with some of the ag enterprise areas, town of Grant, AEA, 3 towns that are zoned for farmland preservation zoning, Wilson, Lucas, and Grant. We do have increased participation there, which I would like to see, and hopefully we'll be able to. Our intention is to track that a little bit more to see increased use of nutrient management planning or coverage in those areas. But beyond that, there's not a lot of really incentive through the farmland preservation program in other parts of the county. So when you compare other counties, particularly I think of on the east side of the state, where you see 100% coverage in nutrient management planning, a lot of times that is part of that reasoning there. But I guess optimism that I have is that we can slowly progress towards that, but it's going to take some time, and you're not going to see. The reality is we will not see 100% for quite some time. Other things change.
Thanks, Chase.
Yeah, a follow-up question on
yeah.
the same thing. But once a person puts in a nutrient management plan and they receive their cost share, I'm trying to remember if this is right, they have to keep that going forever?
Right. So part of the cost share requirement is a notice of continuing compliance requirement that we're required to provide, that they must sign when they accept the cost share. What that basically says is that once in compliance with the ag performance standards, always in compliance, no matter the landowner, the operator, that sort of thing. So that stays with the land. That can be a challenge too. That can be a deterrent actually from some when they hear the word perpetual or the forever statement. That is a hesitation by them to but that also is a challenge for us for compliance and follow-up. Cost share is typically it's a 4-year view of cost share. So we pay $40 per acre per year, or excuse me, per acre, which is basically $10 per acre per year for 4 years. At the end of that 4 years, they're supposed to continually comply with the nutrient management standard. However, that, follow-up, making sure that that's being done, looking at when soils tests are updated, that can be quite a challenge. And I think that's part of the hesitation or the lack of progress that you might see.
Do you offer assistance with nutrient management plans where the person doesn't want cost sharing? They just want some help?
So, there's a software program that is widely used across the state and widely recognized, that's Snap Plus, that helps develop nutrient management planning. That is kind of the preferred method. However, that isn't their only requirement. And that's something that we need to probably explore a little bit more, maybe spend more time on evaluating when and where we would accept a nutrient management plan that is not Snap Plus written or written in Snap Plus. Technically, the standard says they need to meet the 590 conservation practice standard. So that can be done in a lot of ways. I think of some of our counterparts that work with like the Amish community where, software isn't going to be used. There are methods for that. And, we would work with those landowners to help develop that. But again, we have to evaluate our staff capacity to see how many we can actually take on and actually progress.
May I, Mr. Chairman? CVTC used to offer courses on Snap Plus. Do they still do that?
Yep. Obviously, last year was a little bit of a hiccup in that process, but that is still continues. Travis Dreyer in our division works directly with CVTC to continue those farmer-led or farmer-written nutrient management plan programs. So I would say that's probably some of the greatest success that we've had here in Dunn County regarding nutrient management plan coverage is people actually writing their own plan. They understand what goes into it, and they're able to do it on their own without having to hire a consultant to complete that process for them every year, which can get expensive.
Just curious, Chase, for somebody who is, say, not a livestock farmer and has, it's primarily crops, let's say, and what kind of cost share would they typically utilize?
So they would be offered the same cost share that we would if they were a livestock farmer. So this segregated funds, which would be our nutrient management funds that come through our state soil and water resource management grant. That is
so that'd be like
funding source.
waterways and could be fencing,
It could be anything.
Yeah,
Yep.
okay.
Anything that's technically that cost share is intended for people to get into compliance with M151. So that's meeting tolerable soil loss. So making sure that concentrated flow channels in fields are in sod or not actively eroding. Having a nutrient management plan. Part of that nutrient management plan must look at a phosphorus index, making sure that soil phosphorus is managed so that it's not running off into surface water, maintained at a more appropriate level. And then tillage setback is another one in there now. So that came in 2018, I believe, was when that was officially adopted. So that would be a tillage setback from surface water from the top of bank. It's only 5 feet, up to 30 feet is the requirement. So it doesn't seem like a lot, but that is something that we're, cost share would be eligible for things like that.
Okay. All right. Any other?
Just, you don't have to have a long answer on this one, but I'm looking at the abandoned well. I'm curious about things like who reported it, how long did it take to get the cost share, and what do they actually have to do?
Sure. So, it's this one particularly was just staff that were out on traveling to another site, and they seen an old. I don't think this had an old windmill on top of it, but it was just a well sitting with a hand pump on it in the corner of a field next to a road. So made a cold call to the landowner to talk about it, help educate why that's a resource concern, and that landowner was on board. wasn't in use. So the cost share then is available as of the first of this year. We had those cost share funds coming through the state. A design, depending on the depth of the well and the size of the casing, is required for that cost share. And our staff are able to put that together. And then typically that's done by a certified well driller or pump installer. They have to fill out a form that by state requirements that well was abandoned properly. And we need a copy of that form. So that's basically looking at bentonite chips that go down that well to seal that well off. Casing's cut off or removed. Pumping stuff is removed. That's that process. Usually they're for all of our cost share practices and conservation practices, well abandonments can be some of the cheapest, easiest, most efficient ways to specifically address groundwater quality.
That applies to dug wells.
Absolutely.
Well,
Yep.
okay.
Cisterns, dug wells, everything that's
Thank you.
associated with that.
Okay. Again, this is an ongoing review that we do, so it's helpful to take a look at it once a month, and new questions come up and you have a chance to fill us in on what's progress is being made. Any other questions for Chase? Then we'll move on to item 6B, accessory dwelling unit discussion. So Bob and I talked about this after primarily my concern last meeting, that I thought we needed to step back and take some time to make sure that we understood what the elements of this strategy involve before we move ahead and trying to figure out whether or not, one, we want to take the effort to develop it, and two, how we would develop it, what kind of ordinance we would use. So I did some work on this and Bob looked over it, and it's a little rough, but basically following this, we don't have to go there now, but there is just a couple page description that I pulled out of a bunch of different explanations of ADUs. And so you can read through that. If you had anybody had any questions about that, you can talk about that. This sheet here in particular was designed to just give us an idea of what the elements of an ADU were, whether or not that's something, and it gives us a chance to talk about whether those elements are important to us, and whether or not going forward with this kind of a strategy would be in the interest of the citizens of Dunn County. So bear with me. What I'm going to do, I think, and Bob and I haven't talked about this a lot, but maybe I'll just go through this, and then Bob will have some comments on various aspects of it that I'm not very familiar with. But so just to start with, the top part was just an idea of what housing issues typically are ADUs designed to address in the community. And again, this is just pulled out of 5 or 6 different counties or communities mostly that have established ordinances and their discussion about why they're doing it. And number one was generally a recognition that there was a low housing inventory in the community. So it was a strategy designed to increase the amount of available housing in the community. 2 was that to build new housing was getting increasingly costly. And so in theory, this could be a way to, at least for some instances, a way to reduce some of those high construction costs. 3, there was, and we've talked about this, there's often a desire for some additional flexibility in housing, in particular with regard to housing units that would support the independence of family members. A family member who has a disability, an older family member that wants to live independently but not alone. Any number of reasons why that family would generally want more flexibility in their housing. Typically, it is an older family member wanting to either move out of their house or move closer to their children, but not have to build a entirely new unit. They generally talk about the need for having a clear, consistent regulations and requirements so that you don't have a cumbersome process, and that process has a reasonable cost and a reasonable time for the permitting. That's for both the applicant and the zoning staff that have to administer it. And then ultimately, some kind of clear, effective, and fair enforcement process. Bob, do you have any comments on any of those things, or is that?
No, I think that, at least in my mind, I think that's a pretty good outline in terms of the questions, concerns that come into our office about, mother-in-law flats or ADUs. It's generally wanting, a loved one closer, just so they could look after them. So,
And is that? I think I got that 7 to 8 per year from you.
yes,
Is that typical?
yes, that's about average what we get on an annual basis.
So it's not a insignificant number of people that. Does the committee have any thoughts about that as the reasons for why you might want to do an ADU ordinance?
Well, I think, Mr. Chairman, if I may, I think I'm the only person on this committee who's on the housing action team. Well,
I'm on it somewhat.
you are, yeah. I mean, there has been some conversation about ADUs as a way to provide some kind of ongoing flexibility for families in housing. And I definitely think this is something that we, given the, I don't know, call it the housing crisis, I think the need for some additional flexibility is really, would be really helpful to us.
Anyone else? Bob, does Menominee allow this at this point in time?
No,
No,
well, I mean,
I don't think so.
they have language in their ordinances that deal with, allowing, students to, number of students and
Right.
so you could probably.
Special situation.
Yeah, there's some special situations, but they don't specifically address ADUs.
So again, this is county zoning, so we're in outside of the villages and the cities. Does this raise any issues with regard to our general zoning?
Well, I think that, yes, I mean, any time that we add something, there's issues with zoning. I think that probably the bigger issue, and I think it's in your item number 6, is making sure that, that it's fair and equitable both to the applicant, but also fair and equitable to the county, and that the staff can, have the resources to get at it. I think that's probably the biggest concern with nowadays with budget constraints. It's just adding more and with less on hand. But I think there are ways to do that, and so I don't think that's the only reason to say, well, that's important, or we're not going to do it, or we're going to do it. But I think it's an important component, is to really understand the impacts that it's going to have, because it's going to be long term. I think what you'll find is that the first generation, the ADUs, they're there for a specific purpose, but over time, that purpose gets modified and morphs into something else, and then over time, I think that's where there's more and more opportunity or chances that zoning is going to be involved in some of those instances. So it's the long term effects, I think, is the concern that zoning standpoint.
Well, why don't we look at the concerns those are some of the concerns that are addressed by the typical ADU ordinance. So the lower part of that, Tom, if you can scroll up just. Again, this is just a compilation of topics that are identified as typically addressed, and Bob identified as typically addressed in an ADU unit. ADU ordinance. Of course, they typically start with a very clear statement of what it is and is not, so that there's clarity, as much clarity as possible. And then the legal statements for the building code compliance. In some cases where ADUs are allowed, and if they require a special exception, if that's part of the process. The number of ADUs allowed on a lot, generally, that's one. I think we were thinking it would be one. The minimum parent lot size. In some cases, that varies by zone. What are your thoughts about that, Bob? It'd just be whatever our lot size is in that area.
Yeah, so, currently across the board, 1 acre is the minimum lot size, except in the shoreland, because the state says that we could have the smaller one in shoreland. But I think that the minimum lot size is important. But I think that and last time in the discussion that I handed out, there are times when maybe the minimum lot size that even to have a second unit, there may be some setback issues that can't be met. And so I think that having looking at the entire picture is going to be important in terms of if we allow a second unit on a home, what happens, if that second unit really there's some issues with either the sanitation system or the setbacks, and I think that, so I think that was part of the discussion last time is trying to look at some friendly language for variances that would be specific to ADUs.
So, so what you're saying, partially is what you're saying is if you put an ADU on a lot, they eventually have to put in a new septic system, you have to make sure there's enough space, those kind of things you're thinking about?
Well, it could be a new one or it could be an add-on to the existing one, but they're going to have to accommodate, the system is going to have to accommodate for the additional use. And so,
Right, but let's say the system fails, you probably would still have to have space to put the second system in, the new system.
yes.
Just thinking.
Don't quite follow that. Variances, setbacks and stuff. Not enough room. Can't have. Not have that option. That would eliminate.
Dave, I hate to interrupt, but we cannot hear you. Can you move closer?
Okay, I'm sorry.
Thank you.
I'll repeat that. I was saying I don't understand why we would need to have variances, worry about variances and setbacks if we just ruled that if you don't meet the regular rules, regulations, you don't get to have it.
Sure.
Because, if you're gonna have those setbacks and all that, you probably don't have enough room to have it anyway.
So currently in the ordinance, that's the case. And so if a person wants to build a garage and they don't have enough room because there are whatever reasons, we tell them, well, you either can't build the garage, you got to build a smaller garage, or you have to get a variance. And so that's that process is in place. I was just wondering if the committee was interested in supporting ADUs with a little bit of with language on that. But if you just want to treat them all the same, that's fine. I mean, there's currently a process in place for when you can't meet the requirements of the ordinance.
Okay. I see
Question
Mr.
for Mr.
Yeah, Gary.
Why do we have to have a special building? Like, why not just allow a second bedroom. Because if you allow that second building, that's just gonna cause problems down the line. Like you said, it's either gonna be a duplex type or it's gonna be a rental. You know, if you just want a family member, it'd be a lot cheaper just to add on a bedroom. You can still share the bathrooms, the kitchens, the living room, that stuff, and that would meet, I would say, the vast majority of what people want.
So in the past, when, the 7 or 8 requests that we get for this, we explain to the person that there's 2 options. One, you can split the parcel and build, a second unit on its own parcel and be done with it. The other option is exactly what you said, Supervisor Bjork, is that you can add on to your existing home and take care of the people that way. One of the issues that a concern that we have, and this may be something if we go down this path, is to, rather than just say, well, let's just add on a bedroom. A lot of the ADUs that are happening, they're remodeling garages or adding a space upstairs with an efficiency apartment that would have, pretty much self-contained, so that the person could live there independently, and it wouldn't just be having a bedroom. But I think, and those are some of the questions that we would need to address in terms of if we were to move and allow, more flexibility to the landowner in terms of adding on. What kind of additions are we concerned about, and space wise and uses?
So Bob, if somebody wants to add a bedroom on for a family member, that doesn't generally require a rezone.
No.
Or just a building permit is primarily.
Well, we also look at the sanitation load to make sure
Right.
that the sanitation system is going to be able to handle that additional load. But yeah, it's
That can be handled
meet the
with your current
setbacks, the use, and meet the building requirements and sanitation.
It-
You're off and running.
It's when you move to having the more of an independent living situation where you have you have cooking and you have septic in particular, or a separate building.
Yes.
So, yeah. Does that make sense, Gary?
Yes, it does.
I'll take that as a yes.
Yes.
Mr. Chair?
So anything else on that, on the let's see, well, then number 7.
Tom?
Yeah.
Paul Miller wanted to make a
Oh,
comment.
Mr. Miller. Okay.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just wanted to present some additional items for the committee to consider as they talk through this idea. Bob is absolutely correct that most times when this is sought, a mom-in-law apartment is another common way of characterizing this. The intended resident wants to be independent. They don't want to share a kitchen. And actually, if you talk about additions to houses versus standalone buildings, a conversion of an existing garage or the creation of a new, cottage in the backyard, the distinction is a kitchen, a separate kitchen, because that's what allows a separate living. Many, of course, houses have multiple bedrooms and bathrooms. It's the kitchen that's the key. Septic considerations aside. So that's one thing to bear in mind. Many people want that separate living, that ability to live independently, but in close proximity, that drives this kind of request. This second consideration is the costs of additional residences, because that's what these accessory dwelling units do. And whether or not it increases the cost of providing public services, school busing, snow plowing, use of the roads, emergency services. There have been many studies across the country for many years that have assessed the costs and consequences of rural residential development that indicate in general they don't pay for themselves as much in property taxes as they generate in terms of costs for providing those public services. Now, I think the flaw in those studies is that if the occupant of that has also got a job, it is contributing to the economy, the additional income tax, et cetera, may offset part of that. But the easy equation is the observation that an acre of trees or an acre of corn is less costly in terms of public services than an acre containing a house or two houses. So that's a consideration. The final consideration is that many of these appeals for accessory dwelling units are based on, the mother-in-law or my parents, they want to live closer and things like that, or grandma. When those individuals move out, retirement or home, or, nursing home or passing on, you now have a separate unit which inevitably is rented out. So it changes the character of the use of the property and the use of the roads and the demand for public services, because now what you have is a house with a separated and independent apartment, basically. So in terms of land use, in terms of impacts to adjoining uses, in terms of character of the area, the general area, that's another consideration that the committee, I think, should think about. Thank you for hearing me out.
Thanks, Mr. Miller. And those are part of the list that we have here also. So thank you. So the next few are, and again, just trying to not wanting to belabor the point, but the details can be important as regard to what we're getting into. And Paul just mentioned a number of them. And one that's not up there is the public service load, whether that's a consideration or not. But typically the ordinance does put a limit on the number of bedrooms. Typically it allows the existing, as we just talked about, allows the existing home, the principal structure, to be remodeled to accommodate this kind of unit. Again, it may have a maximum occupancy number. And in some cases, I don't think we would, but it has standards for appearance and materials use. And then assurances that access, parking, and walkways, if those are important, are met. And then this gets down to the items I think that Mr. Miller was more specifically referring to, and the knot of the problem, which is what happens after the initial occupant is no longer there. And generally, the ordinance established a restrictive land use covenant that requires the occupancy of at least the owner of the property, of the lot on which these units are, the main unit and the accessory unit are located. The owner must occupy at least one of those units. And then further, because you also have a problem then of the likely scenario is that if there isn't a family member who wants to move in, there will be availability of that unit to be rented. And so if one of the units must be occupied by the owner, then you're putting some kind of a moderation on the ability of that property to become a problematic rental, let's say. And then again, all of that requires some kind of clear managed process for approval and enforcement. Bobby, you thought, I know, about the rental, the future rental question.
But I think that, items at least 9 through 15 to some degree are ones that I think could be problematic in terms of enforcement. And I think that clearly with zoning staff enforcement, writing the language is much easier than the effort it takes to enforce that language.
Right.
And so, and over time, as I said, as you get further and further away from, well, this was for grandma, and now it's whoever is living in there. I think there's more and more chances that there's going to be issues, complaints, and coming back to zoning. One of the things that I think that you may consider, and some of these I'm not sure how to write into the ordinance. I'm sure we can, but I haven't done it before. Would be again relying on the BOA for some of that enforcement and those conditions that would be agreed upon. It's much easier to enforce those through the POA, maybe than just through a complaint and follow up with staff. But regardless which direction you go, I think that clear language in terms of what the expectation is and what they're allowed to do and the consequences of that, I think would have to be very well laid out.
One of the complications for this is that state laws, I understand, you explain if I'm wrong, but state law says that you must allow, I think, says you must allow the rental of private dwellings, no matter what your ordinance, you must allow rental for up to, I think, 3 months. So you aware of that, Bob?
I'm not aware of that, but I could look into that, but I think you may be correct. So
Yeah.
Say that.
that there is some rental.
There's a provision in statutes that that says that basically it's designed, I think, as a way to not for people who own houses not to be able to rent them.
Right.
And so that you can't have an ordinance that says you can't rent anything. This neighborhood.
And we haven't had a lot of complaints about the neighbor renting to people. We do have some,
Yeah.
but that isn't very high on our list of it. Well, it's a rental, you know.
And I think it's written in a way that it doesn't deal with that would be a question we have to deal with.
But I would say that, you know, that when we that it was a concern when we did the comprehensive rewrite that we did segregate the uses, because prior to the rewrite, the residential district allowed single family and duplexes, and there were quite a few concerns and questions and complaints about having a neighborhood that's exclusively residential, or thinking that it's single family, and then having someone buy the lot right next to you and put in a rental duplex. And so I think that you know, so there is that concern about a second unit on another home, you know, in a residential neighborhood, what that does to the dynamics. And I think that's part of what Mr. Miller was referencing.
Right, and that's why I think the provision that at least one of the units be occupied by the owner mitigates a lot of the problems with potential rental abuse. The other consideration is that we have this thing that we didn't have 10 years ago that you pointed out, Bob, we're going to have a lot more of in our area, and that's Airbnbs and VRBOs. So this type of entity could lend itself very well to somebody who wanted to set up a income producing B&B on their property. And whether or not that's a good or bad idea, it's something we need to consider, especially in areas around the lake, let's say, where there is already some concerns about that with single family homes.
Right.
Might be
And I think that's why, you know, having, you know, at the beginning of this discussion, having a clear definition of what is an ADU is going to be important, because that's also going to help to say, well, we're going to maybe restrict the size, the number of bedrooms, so that you know, we're looking at this as an accessory dwelling unit for a specific first purpose. We're not. I don't think that we're looking at it as a rental income for, you know, for Airbnb and to meet that demand.
Question, Mr. Chair.
yes.
Could we make our standards a little easier if we allow a second, like a tiny home that's on wheels, or like a smaller, or a trailer house? I mean, then it'd be easy to put in and be easy to move if the sanitation was big enough to accommodate it. Could that be something that we could think about?
Could be.
Because a lot of your tiny homes are mobile, you know, and they're
We-
self-contained, and that would be another option, in my opinion.
I don't know if you're referencing or thinking that we would allow you know, this tiny home on there to come in and they can set it up, and then when it's done, that we would have them remove it? Or is that an option for them to remove it?
Well, that would take care of the problem of having two residents on one parcel. You know, that'd be my opinion. I would think there should be some options there to look into that part of it.
It could be, we'd have to look at how tiny homes or mobile units have been, how they've been used in communities. Because I think they're probably, I suspect we'll find that they're not as, very few older citizens are going to want to live in a tiny home. They're really awkward to live in if you've ever been in one.
Climbing to the loft.
Yeah, yeah. It's
Well,
just
that and
not
just
the
getting
same.
into
It's
the
not,
darn thing.
it's not handicapped accessible in any way. So that is an option. But allowing mobile homes on properties is problematic in a lot of ways.
But our ordinance is very clear that that we consider that affordable housing, and a second home is a second home. And so we don't differentiate between a manufactured home and a stick-built home.
Okay, so someone could have an ADU that was a manufactured home,
Yes.
like Gary's talking about, or a tiny home. And as long as it met the standard, there wouldn't be necessarily any problem with that.
Right, and that's where I think that, you know, that when we're looking at this, you know, the standards of what is an ADU as opposed to just a second home on there, I think size, in this case, size, the number of bedrooms, I think would be important.
Okay, so any other observations about this? Yeah. Dave.
I just think that, you know, after the mother-in-law is gone, that we've created probably a low-income housing place. Because we probably should have some type of a limit on bedrooms, size, and it's on the same parcel. You're not going to, you know, the rent isn't going to be like the expense of a rent of a house that's on its own parcel someplace, where it's going to be low income housing. And well, I go to meetings all over and hear that we need more housing, we need more low income housing. I mean, we're thinking of doing a study to figure out how to do this. And here's an opportunity that may help that out, that situation out in years to come. And you know, I'd hate to miss that opportunity for whatever reason. I've looked at in my neighborhood, I've known of 2-3 of these places, they're farms that had 2 houses next door, and they usually were the son and the parents.
Right.
And they've gone on to rent, and there's no problem. I mean, the people, somebody that owns the land is living in one house and they're renting the other one out. And I've seen it with trailer houses too. So I think I think we should really consider it.
I was just gonna, Dave brought that up, so Health and Human Services Board is considering a resolution on Thursday to approve a housing study that will be passed on to county board. And certainly this is something that we should ask the consultants to help us look into, because I think you're right. I think it has possibilities for at least partially addressing the housing situation in the county, which is, you know, problematic to say the least.
Can I follow up on that? A housing study, that's basically what our land use plan is doing right now. Aren't they doing a whole lot of needs assessment and so forth?
But not to the degree that
No.
that Supervisor Morehouse is talking about. We're looking at maybe, you know, demand in terms of historically just how many have we seen over the last 10 years, how much, you know, then making projections, how much do we think we're going to have in the next 20 years? And then how much land is that going to pick up. It's not a study that's going to be as comprehensive as a housing needs study in terms of what's out there, inventory, how they're being used, the price ranges and those types of things. That's not part of the land use plan.
You wanna talk about that?
Yeah, so we, West Central Regional Plan Commission has done several housing studies in Barron County, Polk County, very exhaustive ways of looking at what is the housing demand, what is the potential demand across various income and family size levels, what's affordable, and in the process involving all kinds of stakeholders, builders, developers, employers, because workforce housing is a huge issue. So, and there are dollars available from the Community Foundation of Dunn County that will pay for most of the cost of the housing study. So Health and Human Services we've drafted a resolution to the county board, which will be acted on Thursday, and then it will go to the county board in July.
Is there a timeline as to how long that will take, or do we know?
Well, I think that we're ready to move once we get approval, assuming that we get approval from the county board. It will depend on how many other municipalities elect to join the process. As it works right now, it would be a study involving only the county, but I think what we would like, obviously, is to get the other municipalities engaged in as well. They have, West Central Regional Plan has done specific studies for example, the city of Barron would probably be doing a similar study with the city of Menominee, and we've certainly talked to the city of Menominee about participating. The county study probably is about 6 months, but it then, as you add stakeholders and add processes, it kind of takes it out a bit.
And just to note, one of the, I think, encouraging things about that discussion was so far has been that the request to regional planning and their agreement has been that rather than spend a lot of time on very specific data analysis or whatever, we would spend more time on strategy and planning. So the goal of it would be come out of it with numbers, but also a strategic plan about what we want to do and how we're going to do it. So this, for example, could be one of the strategies that could be pushed coming out of there.
Yeah, absolutely.
An implementation plan. One thing I really like about the strategies, it's a way to engage, a lot more people in small scale housing development. And that is, I think that could be a very helpful thing.
Yeah, we're going to really focus on actionable strategies rather than, pages and pages of data. That's not the point. The point is to tell us what we can do to address the issues.
Mr. Chair, and not to cut the discussion short, but if we're going to move, if the goal is to move this ahead,
yeah,
it seems to me at least one of the big questions is the current philosophy or the current mandate or the current rule that says only one home per unit. And I think, so is that something that the committee is behind? Is to allowing a second dwelling on the same parcel? Because I think that's having that direction is going to short circuit maybe some of the process it takes to get the ordinance involved. And so I'm not sure, where the county is in terms of moving from its policy of one dwelling per unit or per parcel to, maybe up to 2 with some oversight. So.
Well, okay, just as a way of moving that along, is it after this discussion, are there any thoughts from committee members about whether or not we would like to explore having more than one unit on a parcel?
Well, but I mean, it's kind of a special circumstance. It's not sort of saying, well, yeah, go ahead, put up a second house. It's,
Right, right. But right now, we're saying, well, you can't even consider that. Right now, we're saying, well, your options are add a bedroom or subdivide your land. And so part of it, if you wanted is to say, well, do we continue that? And then in the cases of, whether it's in the general ag where you need 8 acres to even split it, and they have 7 acres, well, they're kind of out of luck. They can't even create a 1 acre parcel. So I mean, if we're looking to either make it as conducive and at least broaden the appeal of keeping them separate, then I think we need to look at some language changes in our ordinance for that. If we're thinking that no, we would like to allow a second one on there, that's fine. Or is it a combination of the two? But and I could certainly bring back stuff for those, but I'm just wondering just where if there is an inkling on the committee right now in terms of one direction or the other, just so I could maybe start with that piece and come back.
So I'm not hearing, if I'm wrong, tell me, I'm not hearing anyone in the committee say, we sure want to look at having more than one unit on these at this point in time. That could develop. I would say my argument would be, let's stick with what would work for 1 unit per parcel. And we can look at the option of additional units, but once you get into additional units, you get into and it could be a good thing, but it raises a question of development rather than just an accessory unit. And that's another can of issues that could slow down our development of this process, I think.
I was kind of keying on Chairman Bartlett's comments about affordable housing and being able to have either an efficiency apartment or a second smaller unit on the same parcel as affordable housing. I don't know if that's what you were.
That's exactly what I was thinking. I'm looking at what I have seen work in our township is they're on the same parcel.
We're talking about 2. Would you, whether or not we should allow more than 1 unit on a parcel?
Well, I'm talking about a home and then
Right.
ADU. And I think if
What
they're
about
not
3
on the,
ADUs?
if they're not, huh?
What about 3 ADUs?
Oh,
Okay, that's
one.
what Bob is suggesting. So we consider 3.
no,
No,
No, I'm just wondering, is the county interested in having more than 1 unit on a parcel, or should we be looking to shore up or amend our ordinances for those instances where they don't even qualify but could because our ordinance is too restrictive? So is it keeping them separate as much as we can, or allowing the second one as the primary?
I don't think you get the benefits of the low cost and things if you're going to stick with having that they have to be on 2 parcels. I think you get the benefits of having an ADU if they're on the same parcel. I would look at 5 acre minimum if you're going to have an ADU, or something like that, and then that it has to be 1 bedroom or 2 bedroom. Nothing. I would keep it small, and I would definitely make the rule that the owner of it has to live in one of them. But I think that's where you get all those benefits. If you have to have a separate parcel, that's what we have now, and that's cost prohibitive. I think you get the benefits by having two residential units if one's a ADU on the same parcel, but I think the parcel has to be big enough to accommodate it. I think there's a lot of other rules that we have to talk about that should go into it, but I think that's how you get the benefits of that.
You know, kind of, if I may, just kind of the devil's advocate. I mean, the only real cost, and I guess and it is, you know, cost is cost, you know, but the only real difference between having an ADU, which would be a second unit on the same parcel, or just a second parcel. I mean, if you're going to construct it, those construction costs are the same, whether it's on the same parcel or if it's on a different parcel.
Oh,
The cost of surveying may be the difference.
well, I was thinking of a shared well, a shared
They
septic
can still do
system.
that.
It's pretty tough if you're gonna carve out a parcel. Because if you're gonna carve out a parcel, it's just, I just think that creates a lot of other things to worry about down the road with sharing a well or sharing a septic system. I think, I don't know, I just think that you end up with a lot of benefits if we consider two residents, one of them being an ADU on the same parcel.
One of the benefits, you know, of having it on a separate parcel, even if we started with a small size, is that that person could then grow that into more than, so that when the grandma leaves and they you know, they would really like to have a different use, they can add on to it, or it could be a bigger unit. But so, you know, there are pros and cons. I just want to make sure that we kind of talk through those a little bit as we go through this.
What I was thinking is that this discussion would get us some clarity about what it is. Kind of allow the kind of comment that Dave just made to sort of be based on, okay, how does it fit here? But I think the next discussion could be, okay, well, if that's what we want, then what kind of an ordinance do this? You made the argument last time that you should have a provision for separate parcels. Getting some pushback from that, but that seems like the next stage of the discussion. We can't resolve it today, but maybe we could bring that back and have that discussion in the context of the one we had today.
And I'm not convinced that is, you know, it's a single answer, one size fits all. I think that it may,
Okay.
you know, in the end, you know, but I do believe that our ordinance is too restrictive to allow some people the option of even splitting if they wanted to. So I'll bring those back. And so
Why don't we do that? And you can make your case and we can push back or agree, and then we'll decide, okay, how to incorporate these ordinance options into possible forward.
And I will put together at least as objectively as I can, you know, the pros and cons of what that is, you know, so that the committee can.
Okay.
Mr. Chairman.
That'd be great.
Mr. Chairman. I mean, I do think that an ADU is a kind of a special circumstance. I mean, we're not talking about allowing people to build a 3,000 square foot second dwelling on the property. We're talking about shared facilities use, probably limitations on the number of bedrooms. I would suspect we would be talking about some limitations on owner occupancy of at least one of the residences. So, I mean, we're not saying, yes, go ahead, you know, build a second house.
Right.
We're saying build an accessory dwelling unit.
But that's still two dwelling units on one lot. So I was confused when you said something like that. ADU is automatically saying we're going to have two dwelling units on one lot.
Right.
No matter what.
At least more
I
than
thought he
one.
was arguing
Yeah.
for having
Yeah.
more than one ADU.
Yes.
On a lot.
Well, I'm not sure of the number yet, but I mean, you're right, Mr. Kinnear, that that an ADU is you know, that's an accessory dwelling unit that's on the same parcel, and having the provision of separating it on its own parcel, I think would eliminate size restrictions. You can do what you want now because it's on the same parcel. But if it's an ADU, I think that we really want to have some discussions about size and use and long-term use.
Now I understand what you were talking about too then.
Yeah,
Okay.
I just, I think, yeah, I mean, I agree with, well, this is a good discussion. I think it'll be a more informed discussion next time we have it. So, thanks, everybody, for putting
So
up.
I may not get it in 2 weeks, but if I understand, you want to come back with more of a discussion on separating, or more of a discussion on keeping them same, or still a combined discussion. I guess I'm not sure which direction you want me to take.
I'm not sure what you just, what you're saying.
So do you want to have a discussion about what we should do to make it easier for them to keep it on a separate lot?
No, we want to have a discussion about ADUs, which are on the same lot.
All right, very good.
And if you want to, as an ancillary point, argue that we should also allow provision for splitting lots, I'm not opposed to that, but that's, I'm hearing that people are kind of skeptical about that.
Okay. So I guess we put some clear marching orders.
All right, where are we here? Took way longer than I thought it was gonna. Appreciate your patience. Zoning ordinance amendment discussion.
Yes. So we are currently, we have a landowner that is looking to or a company looking to create a non-metallic mine greater than 25 acres for construction aggregate in the town of Lucas. And so there's and it's going to require, it's going to require a rezone, and it's also going to require a board of adjustment, both of those in order to allow that. But there's also at least there's a provision, or at least when we wrote the piece about non-metallic mining and separated out the uses between construction aggregate as being a different mine than industrial sand or other aggregates. There were some discussions and some limitations that were placed on those, to segregate them out. And so what I'd like to do is to set the stage in terms of what the amendment is about, is to maybe just talk about or understand the first sentence that's in the non-metallic mining, this 133802, the applicability, because there's 3 sentences and they seem they're very convoluted until you parse them out. And so and I think that's the reason for the amendment, is because they weren't really parsed out the way that it was written. So we understand, at least that in Dunn County, that the size of the mine over the life of the mine dictates maybe the scope and scale of what you have to do in terms of a permit. So there's a difference there. And also government mines are looked at, government mining operations are looked at differently. So non-metallic mining operations, and this is right out of the ordinance, 13.3.8.2a, non-metallic mining operations and construction aggregate mining operations less than 25 acres based on the life of the mine. So that's one piece of it, because there's a comma, and government mining operations are special exception uses. There is no size restriction placed on the government mining operations. The 25 acres or less is for the construction aggregate. And so, and government mining operations are special exception uses and may be permitted in IA, PA, GA, LI, and the HI districts. All right. So that's very clear. At least it's very clear when you take it apart, that we're talking less than 25 acres are allowed, construction aggregate, mining operation, non-metallic mining, even industrial sand, 25 acres or less, non-metallic mining operations are allowed in those districts. Second sentence talks about, now this segregates out the construction aggregate people. Construction aggregate non-metallic mining operations, 25 acres or larger based on the life of the mine, are special exceptions and may be permitted. And now we've reduced where they're permitted down to GA, and in the industrial districts, light industrial and heavy industrial. All right, so now we've crossed over into non-metallic mining, construction area greater than 25 acres and where they're permitted. All other non-metallic mining operations, 25 acres and greater, based on the life of the mine, and industrial sand mining. And it was, and I don't know why it says and, because it's all other, but anyway, it says and industrial sand mining operations are special exception uses and may be permitted in the non-metallic mining overlay district as regulated in 13.2.14 of this ordinance. So they're treated completely differently. Once, you know, if it's not a construction aggregate, and the size of the mine. So scroll down, Tom, if you could. So in talking with, and this is brought to our attention by Gene Ringer in the town of Lucas, you know, wanting to know what that means, and I didn't quite understand what he was getting at until we really got down and had a detailed conversation. But if you look at what it currently says in our intensive ag and primary ag districts. So this says, and I'm going to read through what it says, and even though it's stricken out, you know, so the following uses may be allowed as a special exception upon approval by the Board of Adjustment as provided in section, and those sections are listed. And so there's several. This is an excerpt, so this isn't everything. But R talks about government operations of less than 25 acres are excluded, excluding industrial sand mining based on the life of the mine. That is not what the paragraph that this came from says. It says that government mining operations meeting the requirements of section. There is no size restriction to government mining operations for this, and so we needed to clean that up to strike that piece where there's a size limitation on government mining operations, because that's not what was written in the intent of the ordinance. And then the second piece, if you can scroll up a little bit, Tom, please. Government. There we go. Government. This is what it currently says. Governmental non-metallic mining operations of less than 25 acres are acres, and then again excluding industrial sand mining based on the life of the mine, meeting the requirements of this ordinance. You know, so that's what it currently says. But that again, that's inconsistent with what the intent of the language in the mining section says. So it really should be, because non-metallic mining operations and construction aggregate mining operations of less than 25 acres, those are allowed in IA and PA according to the language above there. So that's what we're proposing to do here. So is there questions or concern, because it may be a little confusing, so we need to talk about this. But if it's clear, we can move on. Okay, let's move on.
It's confusing.
Are you confused?
A little bit. Yeah.
Okay, so let's talk about it, because we need to go back to, let's go back to this piece, the piece that's above.
What are Gene's concerns?
Well, that they're inconsistent.
Right.
That
They're inconsistent.
that the special exceptions are inconsistent with scroll up again, Tom, to the beginning of the page here with the 13, that the special exceptions are inconsistent. Keep going. Are inconsistent with A here, because A says, you know, that it's construction aggregate non-metallic mining operations less than, so non-metallic mining operations and construction mining operations less than 25 acres based on the life of the mine and government mining are allowed in IAPA. So we looked at IAPA and it's inconsistent with that first sentence. This first sentence says that there is no size restriction on government mining, and in the IAPA language, it kind of married all three of these sentences into a statement, but it's inconsistent with what this is. And in talking to council, these special exceptions they were amendments after this ordinance was adopted, and so the intent is that this piece of it is correct. When we put together the special exceptions, the language got a little bit convoluted and didn't separate out the uses as clearly as what it needs to be. And in some cases, there's just wrong language in there. So think about that where it says, the first sentence, those less than 25 acres, those are allowed in there. But government mining, there's no size restriction. Now let's scroll down to the IAPA, Tom, and we can see that. So here's, it said that government mining operations, and it had a size restriction. There isn't a size restriction above, so we need to take that out of there. And above, it doesn't exclude in 25 acres or less. It doesn't exclude industrial sand over the life of the mine. So 25 acres is just mining operations, industrial sand, any kind of mining operations, and government mining. But government mining, there is no size restriction. So we need to make sure that we keep those thoughts square. Does that make sense now, or does that help?
I'm probably confused still. Why are you excluding industrial sand mining?
Right.
Because that's what the ordinance says. So scroll back up, Tom, please.
Are you taking that out?
This I'm taking it out because it shouldn't have been added, because this is what the ordinance says. If we read this sentence, so this first sentence, there's three conditions here. There's three sentences. So the first sentence says non-metallic mining operations and construction aggregate mining operations of less than 25 acres. So that's the full gamut. That's non-metallic mining and construction. And industrial sand is part of non-metallic mining operations. Less than 25 acres based on the life of the mine. All right. So, and so if we just stop there, those are permitted in the IAPA and LIHA. So those are permitted. And the government operations are also special exceptions permitted, but there's no size restriction to the government operations. They can be larger than 25 acres and still be allowed in the IAPA, GA, LI, and HI. So we're not excluding them. They shouldn't have been included in the language for the special exception when it was first written.
But it doesn't really hurt that they were, does it?
Well, except that it does, because if we go down and to where, let's go back down to IAPA, Tom, and I wish I could see them both on the same screen. So this is adding something here that isn't above there. So one of these is wrong. So you can't have it both ways. You can't say,
look at this one's just basically saying that people blow that up a little bit. I'm sorry.
I can't win.
Yeah, way up. That's good. All right. Now we're talking.
So the first piece, just trying to make it so excluding industrial sand mining meet the requirement. So just trying to make this as clear and as consistent with the piece above.
It seems to me like the intent of this was to require that any industrial sand mining, no matter what the size of the mine, be treated in a different category than other sand mining.
Less than 25 acres.
No, I think if you go up to the top part, again, it says operations under 25 acres and greater. Okay. 25 acres and greater, based on the life of mine, and industrial sand mining operations are special exceptions. So any operation over 25, any aggregate operation over 25 acres,
yep,
or a special or industrial sand mine operation, subject to a special exception. Is that?
They're all subject to a special exception. It's just a matter of where they're allowed, how they're allowed. No matter what, it requires a special exception. It's just a matter of what districts they're allowed.
Down below, it sounds like you're saying that would not be the case.
Well, because here's what it's saying. It's saying this. What it says right now is that a little bit more, Tom, please. Government mining operations, and of less than 25 acres, So that's government, less excluding industrial sand mining operations based on the mine of the mine. So that's a special exception, and that's inconsistent with on the top, because it doesn't, on the top, it just says government mining operations require a special exception. It doesn't say less than 25 acres. So there's no size restriction to the government mining operation. And
But
excluding
this change then would apply a size restriction.
this change, I'm sorry.
So looking at 13.26R would add a size restriction.
Currently is what it has. It's saying currently what it
Right,
says
that's
is
what I meant
is
to
that
say.
government mining has a size restriction, and
Right.
it doesn't. It does not have a size restriction. And so we need, because if there was a comma and it said something else, but this is saying that government's mining operations, there's a size restriction, and that's not what it says above. So it's either, and if the committee would prefer, we could change the above to match here, or change here to match the above.
To
But
attach a size restriction.
But it seems that in talking to council that the intent is that the statement above is where the county was heading, and that we wrote these special exceptions to kind of parallel or mirror what was in there. But the language is a little convoluted.
Okay, what you just said, Bob, was my question. Keep the top, change the bottom, keep the bottom, change the top.
One or the other.
And the bottom was amended after the top was there. So there must have been some reason that the bottom was amended.
Well, we needed to add the special exceptions afterwards, and there was some language to it. But
it must have been concern about size and so forth. Maybe they didn't look at the top, or maybe they looked at the top and said, well, that's not enough. So I'm kind of wondering,
Nick and I had
was this meant to be in addition to the top, or right? That's
Yeah,
not.
I had a pretty detailed conversation with council on this, because we were scratching our heads to figure out, how is it that the language at the top came first, and then that we went and wrote some special exceptions based off the top, but the language isn't parallel with the top, and so it was a mistake. Clearly, it was a mistake in our opinion. It was a mistake in how R and S got written, that it was combining there's three separate sentences up there, and R here combines pieces that shouldn't have been combined out of those sentences. It was just a misunderstanding, it appears, in terms of what was intended for government mining operations in IAPA as to what it says that we wrote.
With the changes, what would the ordinance lose in effectiveness or ability to control anything?
Well, it wouldn't, in my opinion, it wouldn't lose anything, because we are trying to parallel this with what we said we want to do. We're trying to parallel the special exceptions with the intent of what we said we wanted to do with this. We wouldn't be losing anything. We would just be clarifying so that it's clear.
If you go top down.
Yes.
But if you looked at the bottom first and said, okay, we've got this, change the top, would we be?
So then we'd be
If we
saying,
kept the
yes,
bottom,
I got it. Yes.
would we be losing?
It would be the restriction on government mining for size. So we would be saying that, no, it's important that government mines, no matter that if they're 25 acres or larger, that they also would fit in with either the construction aggregate or with the industrial sand, one of those other two sentences. So that would be what would be losing. We say, no, government mining aren't different. They're the same as everybody else, and size doesn't, we don't care what the size is. You're the same as everybody else.
Give me some examples of government mining.
Well, the county has several pits, that they mine for aggregate for road construction and all kinds of stuff. And so the county has several mines that they have that for government use for our road construction.
Was the old Colfax Ferry Pit a
It was.
county line? How big is that?
It's greater than 25 acres.
100, wasn't it?
Yeah, I mean, the whole site was, I don't know how much the actual mine was being mined, but it was a big area.
So you're, Bob, you're thinking that proposal is to amend this.
Yeah, my proposal is that this, the intent of the ordinance when they wrote it was correct. That it meant that there wasn't a size limitation to government mining operations, that we want them to operate in the county, but and we want some oversight. It still requires a special exception. But if they want to be greater than 25 acres, they can continue. Everybody else, once they cross that threshold of 25 acres, now there's some additional scrutiny and oversight that happens. And that's and then also depending on if it's greater than 25 acres, whether it's construction aggregate or if it's industrial sand or other non-metallic mining, we'll treat them differently and allow them in different districts as well. So if we believe that the top piece is correct, then the special exceptions need to be amended, and that was the opinion in discussion that I had with council. If we think no, that this is probably correct, and we need to go back and amend the top piece, but something has to be corrected because they're inconsistent. So one or the other has to be corrected.
I vote for option B.
Option D.
B.
And that's the
These-
direction that we.
I think that these were, I think that there was, as Supervisor Kinnear suggested, there was a reason that this language was added.
And you don't think that it was
Just an oversight?
Yeah.
No, I don't.
So you think we should amend the top?
I think we should amend the top.
I'm okay. We just one or the other has one, and
Scratch
that's
that first.
and that's why we're here
Look
for
at this again. I think I see it differently every time I look at it. I'm sure you and Nick had a great time with it.
When this was in the packet, I
had by all.
Well, people have been really good about looking at things in the past PRD committees. So I think they wouldn't have changed it without some thoughtful process. So you did a good job explaining it, Bob, after.
Excuse me?
You did a good job explaining it after we finally knew what questions to ask.
Well, honestly, I've read this thing in many times, and until I just took it apart almost word by word, it is confusing. So don't feel bad. So let's look at the other ones, because they may be just wrong, and that the top piece is correct. So let's go down to the GA. So this is saying again. So now we're saying that maybe the 25 acres for the government mining is incorrect. That is correct here and incorrect at the top. And so non-metallic mining operations and construction at less than 25 acres based on the life of the mine. So this is for non-metallic mining of less than 25 acres based on the life of the mine. So if we go back and say that the top is incorrect, then I think that we would leave the language as it is. And so I'll go back. I just want to make sure as I walk through these that there isn't a quirky one that says, well, we didn't talk about that. So and then construction aggregate mining greater than 25 acres, there's additional requirements. And so clearly 2 probably needs to be 25 acres or larger, because it didn't say that. So I think that 2 has to be clarified, because it just says construction aggregate and non-metallic mining operations see additional requirements. And so I think that there is a size concern about this in terms of allowing it in GA when we look at the top. So there's probably some work that needs to be done on there in the special exception piece. I can see it. It's just like,
I was just thinking, are we getting too detail oriented as a committee?
well,
Kinda like,
I don't think so, because I think that, you know, when we're talking about amending ordinances, that the towns are going to weigh in, and I think the committee really needs to understand what it is that we're saying. And I get it. This one is really confusing, just because of the different sizes, the different players, and the different districts. But I think it is important that the committee does have a grasp on what this says, so that you can move it on to the county board with whatever amendment we're going to end up on.
I wonder whether it's helpful to be able to look at this, having had you walk through an explanation of it. I wonder whether it would be, whether there's a, I don't see any urgency on this necessarily, right? So would it be practical for us to have a chance to go back after having had this discussion, look at this and come back again?
Well, there's a
Or do you
sense
want
of
us-
urgency, not that we need to do it today or tomorrow, but there is a sense of urgency, because something is amiss, and we have a project that is moving, that is going to be embedded in this language. And so somebody's going to be asking, okay, so which is it? You know, what's the, what are we, you know, what's allowed, what isn't? So there's a little bit of sense of urgency.
Okay.
We certainly won't get this done in time before some of those questions are asked anyway. And in talking to council, his opinion is, well, the intent of the ordinance X and Y, and if there is a challenge, you know, we're moving towards fixing it, you know, and that may mitigate, you know, the effect of a challenge. But I think there is a sense of urgency that we do need to figure out or agree on which piece is inconsistent and fix that piece.
So what do you propose?
Well, I guess what I would propose is let's go back to the top, and rather than maybe walk through all of these, let's go back to the top, to the sentence where all of this is embedded in there. And so if I understand, the committee thinks that's the piece that is inconsistent, and that if I understand you, that it should be non-metallic mining operations, construction aggregate mining operations, and government mining operations of less than 25 acres are special exceptions. And so, and then in the second sentence, and I'm going to assume that this is where you want to couch government mining operations, that it would say construction aggregate non-metallic mining operations and government mining operations 25 acres or greater based on the life of mine are special exceptions and permitted in those districts. And then leave the last piece alone.
Good.
Is
That's what I'd do.
Is that kind of where you're moving towards? Okay.
so never mind. I'm fine.
No, if there's a question, I just.
Well, no, I was just looking. No, that's exactly it.
Okay.
The only thing I'm looking at wouldn't change was the zoning districts. That's no different. They can still get special exceptions in the same zoning districts they could before.
Yeah, so the big difference is making sure that government mining operations are treated the same as everybody else. And then make sure that the language down below, if there's any tweaking to the special exceptions, mirrors is parallel with this language. And so if I will bring that back, have the conversation with council, and bring that back. And if there's any changes to the special exceptions, I'll bring those to your attention.
And if I may, you on the 13.1106, you said you were trying to change that construction aggregate non-metallic mining operations 25 acres or larger. You had 25 acres or larger, but actually have to look at that, at the requirements in 13.3.8 to see maybe it already says in those requirements that it has to be 25 acres.
Yeah. what I was trying, yeah, and we'll do that based on what we're doing. What I was trying to do with this, assuming that the top was correct, is just take the language out of the top and bring it down so that it's not inconsistent because it's the exact same language. But if we change it on the top, then we'll have to modify stuff.
You're not going to change anything.
I don't know yet. I mean, I'll have to look and see once it's changed, see how that, make sure that the special exceptions are consistent with what the intent of this, because they have to be the same. So I don't know.
Just one last one. One last one. If I can remember what I was thinking now, would the additional requirements in section 13.3.8 put an undue burden on government mining operations?
You mean by putting a size restriction?
Yeah.
Clearly, there's some who say yes. The highway department.
Something to consider.
Because as they move through space and time, they're going to be moving out of what they're at and having to rezone and go through that, and it's for government use. And so I think that I honestly think that the top piece was correct, that they had that discussion, but I'll bring it back and we can revisit it. So.
Thanks. Okay. Oh, we're finally down to 6E. Chase, your proposal to fill an unfunded position for the conservation planner and zoning.
It's actually kind of
Joint?
a combination of,
Okay, joint
of
proposal?
things. So
Yeah.
yeah,
It's more zoning than maybe land conservation, but
I
it
can provide some background.
yeah, but it came out of the background from there.
So at the previous meeting in my staff report, I called out to you in my staff report regarding a vacant position that's within the Land and Water Conservation Division within the ENS department. The intention to utilize the unspent funds of that position to continue funding for our soil health specialist, who currently is funded under primarily by grants, 90% by grants, about 10%, 11% by levy, to continue that funding for that position for the remainder of the year. Also, yes, in consultation with our manager team in the division, as well as Paul Miller and Keith Stry, looking at remaining funds that may be available within our department to help support the planning and zoning department and some of their activities. So currently, the estimates for the funds that are available for that are available to be used for another position would be around $48,000. So that would be hopefully sufficient to address any zoning enforcement officer needs. So at this point in time, it's apparent that is the case, but I'll let Bob kind of speak to the need and the plan moving forward on that.
So Chase, if I understand, just for clarity, the pool of money that's available is around 90,000. And that to meet your needs for the remainder of the year, it's about $4,000 to $5,000. And so there would be about half of it is still.
Yeah, and I can clarify that a little bit. So the way that vacant position is included in the current budget is at a step 3 of a grade 12 on the wage scale, which is around $96,000. My needs to continue funding the soil health specialist position is around $48,000 for the remainder of the year, which is about half, leaving half, $48,000 available.
Yeah. And so in looking at this in terms of from a zoning perspective of needs, Michelle will be on maternity leave, and there's going to be a tremendous need for some help. This came up as an option of, okay, well, what if, we could hire somebody using this money? And so we looked at to see if there's even enough money to do it. We looked at 2 different scenarios, and one is looking at if there's somebody in the county that could transfer over, and what we were looking at was in Morgan's department. there was an individual that Mike that may have been interested, and so we put this together, looking at, okay, well, if we had an employee transfer over as LTE, and in Mike's case, you know, if they were the steps and where he's at on the pay grid. And so we looked at it, if we funded it only for the time that Michelle was on leave, or if we funded it from the beginning through the end of the year. And so and then we also did a second scenario that if we just go out and hire somebody, then we would hire that person at an entry level, but then also then at either for Michelle's time or through the end of the year. And so what we came up with, and this is through HR, they put this together. What they came up with is that if we transferred an existing employee over and only had that person for the time that Michelle was gone, that's about, let's say $28,000 in rough numbers. If we had that person stay through the end of the year, it's about 41.5. If we looked at going out and hiring somebody and bringing them in at the entry level for the same time, for Michelle's just gone, that's about 20,300. And if we had that person through the end of the year, it's about $33,000. So I've had a discussion with Morgan's employee, and he was interested, but he's concerned about the uncertainty, and so he thinks that his better option may be just to he was thinking about going back to school and retraining, that he would just do that sooner than later. So he has declined that. And so unless we find somebody else in the county option, the top piece is really kind of off the table now. And so in looking at the second piece and looking at how much is left over, there's certainly funds left over to do this either way. And I think that Paul is still on. I think that this is before the committee as a discussion rather than action item, because I think Paul would have the authority to delegate how these funds would be allocated. But I guess we're interested in understanding the committee's position in terms of well, should we just fund it, for the time that Michelle's gone, or should we look at having the person through the end of the year? So does that make sense? We've moved
Yeah.
these options. Okay.
So one question, Mr. Chairman,
Yes.
if that position is funded like 90% by grants, are the grants specific enough that you can take that money from a soil health specialist to put in the zoning?
So the grants that are funding the soil health specialist position right now will expire in the end of June, and the second one will expire at the end of August. So the intention would be to take the funding that is for the unfilled vacant position within our division and supplement that position through the remainder of the year. So the grants really have no bearing at that point in time, because they will have expired. Then there is funds that would be still available then that could be used for the particular situation now in a zoning enforcement officer to fund someone really for the remainder of the year. But that would be the situation, and not necessarily any bearing on whether or not the grants would have impact at this point in time.
Mr. Chair,
Yes.
Chase. So there's 90,000 there. That's from
96,000.
96,000. If this didn't occur, what would you be planning to do with that?
My intention at the time was just to fund the soil health specialist position through the remainder of the year, which is still the case. And the rest of those funds would go back to the general fund.
Thank you.
With my request for 2022.
Yeah.
Do you have a recommendation?
I think Mr. Miller has.
Mr. Miller, do you have a recommendation?
I think in the light of Bob's news that the internal candidate turned down the offer of a transfer from solid waste over to planning and zoning. The approach that staff will recommend, the approach staff will take is to reach out, trying to get an LTE. I'm suspicious that we'll find somebody willing to work for so short a period of time. See if we can get somebody on board to cover during Michelle's absence. And if people express, no, it's not worth their effort to work only that short period of time, offer in that case to extend it through the end of the year. I'm skeptical about our ability even to get somebody from the outside to work for that period of time, June, presuming June through December, the end of December. But we'll take a two-step approach in terms of talking with any candidates that we do interview and that we are inclined to offer for that LTE position.
Is this position, could this position be subletted out?
We
to,
looked
like,
into
senior
that.
care?
Bob did make inquiries of the consulting firms that, we could turn to. Bob, do you want to tell them your findings?
Good question. Arlen. So we did, before we landed on this idea, I did reach out to both Cedar Corporation initially, because we're doing quite a bit of work with them, and they don't have the staff, and they're not willing to gear up for staff for something that is short term. So I also then went out to SEH, Shardella Hendrickson, out of Chippewa Falls, and spoke with them. The people that they have that could do this are the closest one is Minneapolis, and so they're just concerned about also resources and being able to meet it. And then talking to Ayers and Associates out of Eau Claire, they have nobody in the Eau Claire office. Their closest person that they have on staff that they could use for this is in Milwaukee. So the consulting world is not interested, and probably for the same reasons that Mr. Miller just spoke about, just because they don't have the staff, they're not willing to gear up for just for something that may be either 3 months or to the end of the year. So we did look outside.
What happens if we didn't hire someone? How long of a backlog would that create?
Well, we don't know, but I could say that it will be a backlog because it's dependent on just how many come in, because it's not a number that is consistent. So some weeks it's 2, some weeks it's 8. And so, but clearly we would have to make some judgment calls in terms of, all right, sanitation and zoning inspections are the two big time crunches in terms of our workload, and we clearly can't do both of those while Michelle is gone, because we don't have the credentials for sanitation and zoning. And so there would be a backlog. I don't know how much, Dave, but clearly things are going to slow down just because there's one less person doing it.
Which one are we outsourcing now?
Well, we're outsourcing just the inspection piece, and so we get all the work ready and we send out. So we're contracting currently with Cedar Corporation for inspections for expedited fees for zoning. We are in the process of training some inspectors for sanitation. Cedar went out and got the POUTS. So there's 2 certifications that are needed for sanitation inspections. One is the POUTS and one is the soils. Somebody has to review the soils. We have 2 people on staff with the soils credentials, Michelle and Janet. So while Michelle is gone, Janet can still review the soils and get the stuff ready so that the sanitation inspections can occur. But Janet also does, and that was the reason for this proposal that's before us now. She also does quite a bit of work on zoning to get those ready, and Michelle does quite a bit on zoning, so they kind of cross over. So would seem that if there was going to be a slowdown, it's going to be on the zoning side rather than on the sanitation side. Mostly because I think that we are fairly certain that the sanitation world is those schedules are more fixed than maybe some of the zoning schedules. And people, at least historically, when we've talked to people in terms of, all right, if you need a zoning permit, you have two choices. One is you can wait for, we have limited staff. When yours comes to the top, we'll get to it, but I don't know when. And if that doesn't suit you, if you have a dire need or a more finite schedule, then you can pay the extra, and then we will contract that out. So I think we would still be able to meet the expedited schedule. We would still be able to meet the zoning, but that's the piece that I anticipate is going to back up, because I think we're going to focus on sanitation as a primary, and then zoning, and then expedited, probably in that order.
Could we just source all of zoning?
Sure. I think you can outsource. I would say over time you could probably outsource zoning. I mean, in terms of all the entire department.
On all the work.
Well, I would say that if there was to be, if you wanted to explore that it would have to be something that was at least a little bit longer than maybe through the end of the year. That if the consulting world is going to gear up and get those credentials and staff up, they're going to want a little bit more assurance that it's more than just through the end of the year.
Yeah, I guess the reason I'm asking these questions is looking at the whole picture of the county. We're adding positions this year. Position being added for medical examiner. Other position added for the judges, because we have 2 new judges. We only have so big of a pot of money, and we're going to have to make some tough decisions. And highway, since 17 to 19, we lowered the levy to highway $2 million. And I've been trying to drive different county roads. I've been on some that are way worse than our town roads. That's a shame. And we can't take any more from highway. Just, I don't see how we could. I suppose we could, but we've taken so much now that it's hurting us in the amount of money we get back from the state. So I think we're going to have to make some tough decisions. And if we add a position now, it's just going to make every position we add now, it's going to make a tougher decision come in a few months. And that's why I'm asking these questions, if there's any other options, because
well, the
we
position,
all like to do the best we can, but we only have so much fun.
the position that we're looking at is LTE, and if we went this direction, it would give us some time. If you wanted to, if the county was interested in looking at a broader consulting picture, it would give us some time to work out those details and still meet the workload. This is an LTE. This is going to expire at the end of the year, so there's no expectation that there's going to be an employee for next year based on this.
I've heard that, and soil specialist, I'll use that as example, because when we hired that position was going to sunset when the grants went.
Yeah, I'm not saying
Well,
that I wouldn't.
We're going to add it for the rest of the year, right? So it didn't sunset when the grants went. That's what I'm saying is every time we add a position, we have a real tough time taking that position away.
From my perspective, I mean, if it's there's a need, there's a need for for a position. Now, whether that need is met internally by hiring somebody, or if that need is met externally by contracting, that doesn't, either way, I'm okay with it because the need is going to be met. And so if you're thinking, Dave, that we might want to consider looking outside, at least having some time where the work is still being taken care of would allow the time to have those discussions, to maybe work something out.
And that would work great if that scenario. I'm all for hiring that position. So come that. Bothers me as we hire for the rest, if we end up hiring through the end of the year, we're used to that level of service and now we don't want to. That's where I see the.
I can tell you that clearly, even now, that there's a need for some additional help. And so, but whether or not we fill that position internally, or if we even look at external, we're getting at it. But there are things that clearly aren't getting done or behind.
Can you sit closer to your microphone?
Oh, I'm sorry, Paul. Yeah.
Okay.
So what part didn't you hear, Paul?
Please start at the very beginning again and repeat yourself
Okay.
verbatim.
All right.
No,
In the
go ahead.
beginning, there was light, and then. So what I would say is that clearly in my circumstances, that while Michelle is gone, there's an absolute need for additional help. Even today, there's a need for some additional help, and whether we want to say, well, we're going to pay for that additional help, or we're going to say, well, no, we're going to just continue, and we just won't do those things, or those things will be further behind. Those are choices that my department can live with, but I'm going to be asking the question so that the decision can be made. And so there isn't an expectation on my part, Dave, that if this position is funded for 4 months, or this position is funded through the end of the year, that's any sort of a mandate that there's a free pass, that if I ask for a position, that it's going to be approved. I understand where we're at, and so even by asking for a position, it's going to be based on need and budget, and there's no expectation that just because we got used to this, that we're expecting it to go through. That is not the intent behind this. The intent behind this would be having it through the end of the year would really allow us to get, when Michelle comes back, to get caught up on some of the things that we're behind on. But it is going to go away. But if the county is interested in saying, well, let's look at outsourcing as a way to do this, this is the time to start looking at that in terms of what we want to do. I'm either way, as long as the work is being done. Honestly, I don't care if it's internal or external. We're still have some oversight and make sure that it's standards.
I think you got it.
Okay, thank you.
Mr. Miller, you have any comments?
No, I'll just reiterate that this is intended solely and basically to provide coverage during Michelle's absence.
Yes.
Anything else is subject to further review. This is in no way a guarantee of a permanent position.
Understood.
Question for Mr. Coulson, Mr. Chairman.
Yes.
Personally, I think there's some jobs that should be done by county employees. And my question for Bob is, how much are we spending about yearly for farming out some of these operations to Cedar Corps? If you put that towards their wages, and if you got like a new college graduate that graduated this spring at entry level, maybe it wouldn't be so bad.
We adjusted our fee schedule to accommodate hiring the consultant for expedited fees in zoning, and we've adjusted our sanitation fees to accommodate the people at Cedar Corporation. I don't have a number yet for the sanitation.
So what you're saying then, Robert, is that we're actually increasing the tax load on the citizens by farming it out, because we got to increase the fees, what they normally would be paying.
I'm not sure I follow. Say
If you
that
had
again.
if you had to increase the fees for sanitation and planning or zoning, then you're actually it's a tax increase on the citizens because they have to like pay more if it wasn't being zoned out.
Actually,
No.
Supervisor Bjork, it's the
Mr. Miller, why
opposite.
don't you respond to that? And then we're going to move on.
I'm sorry?
Why don't you respond to that? And then we'll move on.
Yeah, Supervisor Bjork, it's the opposite. Fee-based for specific services are not an increase to taxes. Because these services are voluntary, nobody forces you to get a septic, to change your septic or get a setback variance or anything else. These are voluntary. The fees are intended to offset the cost without the rest of the taxpayers subsidizing that request.
These are important.
Like your two different opinions, sir.
That I think you're right, Gary. There are. So, but for now, we can't resolve that. So let's, I think we've beaten this to death. You guys have a lot of thinking to do about this, and good luck.
Thank you.
I will be having a conversation with Mr. Miller.
Yeah. Okay. Let's move on to the next item. I believe that is 8B, review of the land division fee schedule.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. I brought, or this fee schedule was before the committee at our last meeting, and both, I guess I went through the whole thing here, explained the rationale behind the numbers. The fee schedule you have in front of you today, I have modified slightly, and that item is the certified survey map review. 2 weeks ago at our meeting, I was proposing a $250 flat fee for all certified survey maps, plus a $20 additional charge for each lot or outlet that was on that map. And after further review, looking at past historic trends and just generally the work that I'm getting in the office right now, I'm recommending this fee be slightly increased to $250. So that would be my recommendation. The reviews have become more administratively time consuming on my end. Quite often I receive incomplete maps and applications. Also, the number of revisions on a lot of these maps is increasing, results in increased staff time. I have to communicate with the surveyor. I send out 14 revisions on a map. The map comes in a couple days later and only half of them were made. So I have to follow up again and find out why they didn't make the other 7 revisions. So I guess if we're really trying to cover our costs, I think that number certainly warrants a small modest increase. So my recommendation to you this morning would be on the certified survey map to change that to $250 flat fee plus $20 per lot or outlot. Any questions on that discussion?
Mr. Chairman, may I, in our last meeting, I raised the question of timing. When had this fee structure been amended? And it hasn't been amended for 10 years. And then Mr. Carlson has done a lot of work looking at the actual time that goes into it. And I think, budget is always such an issue that I think we need to make sure that our fee schedules are sort of keeping pace with the costs of things. And 10 years is a long time without looking at a change. And we need to be able to cover, to the extent that it's possible, to cover staff time and actual costs. And so this seems to me entirely reasonable and appropriate.
Any other comments, questions?
I would just much rather err on the side of the fees being more than our cost than under, because the whole picture of the budget is just, it's not looking good. It really is. I think we're going to have to make some tough decisions this year. I really do believe that. I hope that these do cover your costs, because if they don't, sooner or later, we're gonna be in this, the boat of, how can we afford it?
I mean, the reality is that fees are never going to cover the cost of maintaining a survey division. So those are all a fair amount of just maintaining the basic function of the office is going to come out of general fund, no matter what. I think these have to just be, these are extra services, and we got to cover the cost of providing them.
If we run out of money, there's counties that there's counties
Yeah.
that are pretty much broke. And they really have to make some tough decisions. I'd like to make those decisions before that happens.
Yeah.
And we have to say, okay, we're gonna, outsource all this work. Well, that company that we outsource it to is covering all their expenses. Everybody in their office, everybody in their building, everything. So I believe that we're probably better off charging more now than all of a sudden we can't afford to have this division, because we have to make a tough choice. And what divisions or what departments can we eliminate because we're not mandated to do this, or we can outsource this. I firmly believe we have to start looking at this and making our choices so we can make them more sustainable.
Are we allowed by state law to charge more than what it costs us for things like this? Isn't there some?
So Tom, you're proposing this as would be our current fee structure.
This would be our current fee structure or schedule, but it would not be effective until adoption of our new ordinance. So right now, our fee schedule is embedded within the current
Oh, I
ordinance.
see.
And
Okay.
so to change that would require an amendment of our ordinance. We don't want to.
But that's not going to be the case in the future. So we will have more flexibility in adjusting this if it turns out that it needs to be raised.
Correct.
Any other questions?
Do you need a motion?
I don't think we need a motion on that. It's not an action item.
Actually, I believe it was.
Thought it was.
It is an action item.
I thought it was an action item.
It is an action item. I just confused me when it said action item down there. So not action item. Yes, an action item. Is there a motion to approve?
I move approval of the fee schedule as amended.
Is there a second?
I will second
We
it.
have a second. Any further discussion? All in favor, say aye.
I
Opposed? Okay. I think that's the end of the agenda. Any announcements?
I have one, Mr. Chair. So at our last meeting, I mentioned that our survey records were in the process of being put online, made available to the public. That has happened at the end of last week. And I've been getting some very positive feedback from surveyors that are using it since the inception. So my phone hasn't been ringing nearly as much as it has in the past from surveyors, especially looking for information. So I'm excited to announce that, going forward, being able to better serve our constituents. So.
Okay. Anything else? Next meeting, June 8th. Okay. Then we're adjourned. Thank you.